what we do at the beginning of this conference to kind of make sure everybody is tuned in is we take a moment of silence and really a reflection. And I just want to give a shout out. Jimmy Castillo was the person who did this historically. He's a native elder here, Tongva elder in the LA area. He passed away last year, and he was a real supporter of the program and of conflict resolution and our conference here. And so he passed away last year. So Pastor Witherspoon has agreed to this year gracefully to take our how do I say that, to really start us off here so that we are in the right frame of reference and mind. And so I'll pass over the mic here to Pastor Witherspoon. Pastor, do you want to lead us here and as we continue, and then we'll go to Mike Spagna, our provost.
Yeah, I just want to lift up a short prayer, if you will allow me to. Lord God, as we participate in this conference and live out our daily lives, we pray that our love for humanity would be our guiding star as we work throughout the world as instruments of peace. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Pastor. Appreciate that. Now I'm going to go over to our provost, Mike Spagna, who's a supporter of the conference and of dispute resolution and restorative practices, peace building. Mike, would you say a few words for us?
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. And I want to acknowledge, I really like the way you opened this conference with really identifying and greetings to everyone on here. I want to give a special shout out to Jay. Good to see you, Jay, on the screen. I know I look a lot smaller on the screen than in person. I'm actually 6'4", but it's great to see you again. And thank you for coming. Thank you for coming and visiting our campus recently. It was great to see you. And I want to start out as we open up this 14th annual conference by also recognizing that we stand on the shoulders of giants. The reason why we have an NCRP program at California State University, Dominguez Hills is exactly for what's already been shared. It really is standing on the shoulders of giants like Dr. Churchman, like Dr. Turk, and Dr. Jarrett in terms of making sure that universities can be in this space to convene professionals and practitioners in a time when the world needs it more than ever. And so I know this will be an exciting exchange of ideas today. This is very much from a practitioner's perspective, which we all need. It's very consistent with the mission of our university. Our university at Dominguez Hills, we're one of 23 universities in the California state system. We are the largest public higher education system in the United States, educating on average about 500,000 students per year. And consistent with our mission, we are all about practical applied skills for students and making sure that we prepare frontline practitioners, making sure that they have viable jobs, careers, personal lives. Also, you might know that we have a big distinction we received in the last year. California State University Dominguez Hills is now ranked #1 in the United States in socioeconomic mobility. And what that means for all of us is that instead of simply perpetuating privilege, as some parts of higher education do, we are all about having students graduate with little or no debt, getting them into very prospective and wonderful careers, and really making them agents of change in society. So that's our mission at the university. On behalf of President Parham, who couldn't be here today, he's in Washington, D.C., working on additional advance and support to help with our mission. I want to really share the excitement I have that this is a great opportunity, as it always has been, for you to connect with other professionals, to learn from each other, to make sure that we're all aligned in a vision where the world sorely needs this right now. So I'm excited to hear many of the speakers today. And I'm particularly excited to be able to listen and welcome our keynote speaker, Tushar Gandhi. So I'm very happy to have him with us as well. And I want you to know that from our perspective at the university right now, there are a lot of concerns, especially among young people, as to why do they want to pursue an advanced degree? Why would they want to get a bachelor's degree? And I'm going to later this afternoon greet 350 high school students that are all aspiring to be teachers here in the Los Angeles Unified School District and beyond. And I always share with teachers and prospective teachers that there are two expectations I always have. I was a former dean of education for 9 years at another Cal State university, and I used to leave those graduating class with these words, which were, I want you to do two things as you pursue your career. One is help students find their community. And I think everything you do as practitioners and as experts in negotiation and conflict resolution and peace building is all about finding community. The second thing that I would really emphasize, and I'll emphasize this afternoon as well, I think in our society right now, we have a notion that to change your mind is a sign of weakness. And I encourage everybody to be in spaces where they encourage others to change their minds. That is not a sign of weakness. That's not what builds our society. What builds our society are just empathetic bridges, understanding other people's perspectives, and working through a work of the heart. And this is a work of the heart. So with no further ado, on behalf of President Thomas Parham and myself, the leadership and the faculty and students and the staff at California State University, Dominguez Hills, I welcome you here to the conference. And now I turn it over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. Over to Brian Polkinghorn in Maryland. Brian runs the program, the Buzzerman Center for Conflict Resolution. He also built the Salisbury, built from the ground up the Salisbury program on conflict analysis and dispute resolution. He also built the Florida program, by the way. He's now at the Salisbury University, and Brian is going to introduce Tushar Gandhi for us. Go ahead, Brian.
Thanks. I'd like to piggyback on what Mike said, standing on the shoulders of giants. And this center is a lot of giants started this thing off, just like Cal State's program with Marco and David. And I couldn't be anywhere without Tushar and his father, Arun Gandhi. It's a nice name to have in our field. But Tushar Gandhi is about my age. We consider ourselves brothers. I worked with his dad for almost 24 years. And next month, it'll be 1 year since his father passed away. Exactly, I think, the way he wanted to close the last chapter in his book, in India, on the farm, but surrounded by people that he loved. But Tushar is his own man. And he had to live for so many years under the big shadows of not only his father, Arun, but grandfather Malanal, his great-grandfather, the people he's called Mahatma, but Mohandas Gandhi. And Tushar is his own man in the sense that you can't do any stereotypes, even with the Gandhi name. I won't get into details, but trust me, he's quite the character. Talk about empathy. He's empathetic. And I really appreciate the fact that Tushar is up at 1:30 in the morning in Mumbai, being able to speak with us tonight, because he knows what we do is important. It's good. And it's a righteous thing on your part, Tushar. But I want to say three things very quickly. And Tushar knows what I'm about to say, but his great-grandfather said, my life is my mission. And his message, my life is my message. Same could be said for Tushar's grandfather, his dad, and Tushar himself. When that torch got passed, it went all the way down right to him, and now he's in the sunshine leading the way. So I'm really happy to be able to walk along that path with him. And then the other thing Gandhi did not say, well, he did say something along the lines of this: people will follow me in life, revere me in death, but no one will make my cause theirs. That's not true. Look around, everyone, and look at all the faces on this screen, and look at Tushar, who's leading that way. And we know it's the truth. It's just maybe not as prominent. It's not in front of TV cameras, but with a little bit of humility and behind the scenes work, a lot of us are doing the work of Gandhi and King. And finally, I want to end by saying that Tushar's dad is really the man behind this, the quote, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." It was credited to Tushar's great-grandfather, but about 40 years ago, Arun was giving a talk here in the United States, of all places. And he made this really long quote that is of his grandfather's work. And somebody said, well, Dr. Gandhi, what do you mean by that? And Arun said, I guess what my grandfather's saying is we should all just be the change we wish to see in the world. And it's stuck. And somebody who lives those words every day consistently is my good friend Tushar. I know I'm kind of working him up. He's a normal human being. He's a great guy to hang out with. And I want to say one thing before we give the floor over to Tushar. Tushar, I hope you have the opportunity to mention something about the Gandhi Legacy Tour this year, especially in light of the passing of your father, and that this is a memorial tour. So if in your remarks you have a chance to say something, please do so. If not, I'll say something at the end of the conference. So I'm going to hand this over to Tushar to let him give us words of wisdom.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you very much, Brian. You've always been very generous and kind to me, and I'm flattered. But I know that I live in the shadow of greatness. I have still to achieve my own place. But let's talk about conflict resolution, because today I think no matter where the conflict, all of humanity is threatened by it, and is stressed out because of that. Unfortunately, it also ends up dehumanizing many of us, and many a times when I participate in such talks and meetings, people want specific comments to be made according to the specific needs of regions and things. And, I think humanity now has reached the stage where it doesn't matter where the conflict happens. It threatens all of us. It threatens the very existence of humankind, whether it is civil strife, whether it is industrial strife, whether it is military strife between war between nations. All of humanity gets affected by that. What is worrying to me is that just like soldiers, society also is having to bear the brunt of all the conflicts that simmer in our society, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our cities. And it's affecting, just like soldiers who come back from war have PTSD. I think society also is now having similar symptoms where we are becoming dehumanized to the suffering of people elsewhere. If Russia bombs Ukraine, or Ukraine fights with Russia, or Israel is bombing Gaza out of existence, what difference does it make to me? I'm sitting in Mumbai, India. I'm safe. I don't have to worry. The fact is that that is killing the human being within us, and that's what my great-grandfather always said. Not being affected by the sorrows of or the sufferings of others is a dehumanizing experience, and that kills the human being, and that is a very sad consequence. And that's where my great-grandfather talked about resolving conflicts before they even happen. He said intervening in a conflict is too late, because you allowed the conflict to happen, and you have then jumped into the fire to douse it. What is required is like a good doctor who identifies the symptoms of something that is going to become an ailment and starts treating those symptoms so that they don't progress to the level of a terminal illness. And that is what is required in society today also. And so in the past few years, I've always been talking about conflict prediction and prevention. We don't let situations reach a state wherever, within families, within societies, in organizations, in all those places. Symptoms are there, present and very apparent, but we decide to ignore it. In my own country, in India, we have been watching, people like me, we've been watching the rise of the extremist element in our society. And we've been fooling ourselves to believe that it's a passing phase, it's a lunatic fringe, and it'll just go away. We don't need to respond or react to it. Till we've reached a time in my country where people like me have been pushed to the fringes and made inconsequential, and those whom we were dismissing as the lunatic fringe are now center stage and holding sway over what is happening. And this is what happens in every conflict. We keep turning a blind eye towards developing conflicts, and we hope that it won't happen, but it does. Once motion starts, unless it is stopped, it will keep gathering velocity and increase in speed. And that is where we need to work, because, as I said in the beginning, a conflict anywhere kills the human being within all of us, kills our humanity, makes us inured towards conflict as it has happening, the suffering of the people. We are not bothered by it. We don't realize that every weapon that is supplied to Israel causes suffering in Gaza. Every time a terrorist organization is armed, it causes suffering for humanity. It's not just the target people or the target objective, but all of humanity that gets affected by it. And this is where we need to broaden this whole concept of conflict resolution and take it to the stage of conflict avoidance, working to avoid conflict much before that happens. My great-grandfather practiced that. It wasn't as if he did not uh, step in to resolve conflicts, but he rather preempted conflicts and decided. And when he went into conflict zones, like in the last few years of his life, when he went into conflict zones where India was being torn apart by communal violence and insanity, instead of playing the blame game, because even today, when we go into a conflict situation, we try to find or we try to find whom to blame. But if you look at what he did when India was being torn asunder by Hindu-Muslim conflict, he did not go into any situation and say, you are guilty of the massacres and you need to atone and you need to be punished. He just said a mistake has been committed and let us resolve that the ill effects of that mistake don't continue. Let's work together to bring back peace. Let's work together to bring back harmony. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened in the rest of the world. That lesson that my great-grandfather wished to teach us has not been learned by the world so far, by humanity so far. And so we allow the conflicts to happen and then we wait to apportion blame for that conflict. What we end up doing is, once we start apportioning blame, then the justice system built on the atavistic need for revenge comes in. And so we want somebody to be punished. And that sows the seeds of future conflict. And so we never really resolve conflict. We just postpone conflict and put it away and say, okay, maybe 10 years down the line, what we are doing today will cause some problems. But it'll be 10 years down the line. It may not be my problem to resolve. But it's always going to be a problem, and we need to remember this. And so it is time that we don't treat conflict as an academic subject, but we treat it as a flaw in the human psyche and start working to correct that. Like psychiatrists work with psychological disorders to prevent tragedies from happening. Counseling is required in this, very patient counseling is required. And so it it calls for some kind of ability to predict, to gauge the symptoms in society and predict how we will deal with, or how, if this is not dealt with in time, it will lead to a conflict. I am still learning how to intervene in conflict. And fortunately for me, the situation in my country where conflicts, internecine conflicts of not resulting in war kind of situations, but in disputes and in animosity and the preponderance of hate in my country is teaching me how to deal with that. And so that is a learning lesson, a living lesson. As Brian said, my life is my message, but I think my life is my school, is much more appropriate for me, because as life teaches me lessons, I learn more and gain experience and come back with Brian. Brian asked me to talk about the Gandhi Legacy tour. One of the objectives of starting that tour that my parents did almost 2.5 to 3 decades ago was to familiarize the West with the situation in India. While the situation seemed very hopeless from Western standards, the fact also was that there was some work that gave hope that was being done. And so the twofold objective was to show the hopeless situation and then show the glimmers of hope that a few people were bringing about in that situation. And as my great-grandfather said, poverty was the greatest crime against humanity. And the disparities that poverty caused were the sowing fields of conflict for future conflict. And all over the world, we have seen that class conflict has been something that has taken the biggest toll on humanity. It is a conflict which happens in such a manner that we do not see the casualties concentrated into a small time frame. But over a large period of time, the casualties caused by class conflict are much greater than the conflicts in war zones or the casualties in war zones. And so one of the reasons to sensitize people was to bring them to India and show them the projects where work was being done on the ideology of my great-grandfather. And while my father was alive, he almost every year without fail brought groups from the West to come and witness this work happening in India. And for the year before my father passed, was the first time I led one of those tours, because my father was indisposed and he could not participate in the tour. And then we lost him last year. And so we've decided to have a tour in December, January this year in memory of my father, and try to revive it. Details of the tour, its itinerary, and other details are all available on GandhiLegacyTours.com. People can go and see that, and we will share it. We have a page on Facebook also, which talks about Gandhi Legacy Tours. And so I would request people to go and take a look at it and see if it will be possible to participate in it, because we need to see, along with the despair that disparities cause, we also need to see the hope that what my great-grandfather called the work of rebuilding happening as it happens, where it happens, and the change it brings about in society. This work of rebuilding society from scratch, where nothing exists, is also a kind of conflict resolution. Where class conflict, the casualties of class conflict are helped to get on back onto their feet. And so that is my objective in life. I support, along with my father, the projects that he's helped start and he helped come to fruition. I am continuing to support them with the help of people and acquaintances and friends like Brian, who have been vocal advocates for those causes. And that is preventing the conflict of despair, of disparity in my country at least, and mitigating it to a great extent. And so I think that is all that qualifies me to be able to address all of you who are much more learned and equipped to deal with conflicts and disputes. So I would like to beg your forgiveness for my impudence in believing that I could give you a message. But, this is what I wanted to speak about ever since Brian talked to me about this conference. I'm talking about Brian Polkinghorn and Brian Jarrett, who briefed me about the whole thing. And so thank you very much for this opportunity. And if there are questions, I'll definitely try and answer them to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Thank you, Tushar.
I am not at my best because it's pretty late and my brain is now slowly going off to sleep. So please bear with me.
Thank you, Tushar. Maybe we could open up the floor to questions, comments and questions, and for Tushar Gandhi. And also, just as well, I just want to make a point. There's a real connection between MLK and the Gandhi,
Yes.
Whole way of thinking. And we have Ambassador Rose here today, who had a big part in creating MLK Day and this idea of civil rights. And so I wonder if we could speak a little bit about that connection.
Yes, I would love to.
And another question, yeah. Thank you, Tushar.
Speak about that because the entire American civil rights movement took its inspiration from the Satyagraha movement in India, the nonviolent civil disobedience movement in India, to such an extent that in some of the ashrams of Bapu, a lot of the leaders of civil rights came and lived over there and were trained by Bapu's followers in passive resistance, the method of passive resistance. And they went back to train the cadre that actually battled on the front lines of the civil disobedience movement. And I have a fond memory because I live in the city where that happened. MLK and his wife were invited, Coretta were invited to come to India by the government of India. And in 1959, they came to India as state guests. And they were traveling all over India. And when they landed in Bombay, my city, by that time, the house where my great-grandfather would stay when he was passing through Mumbai had been converted into a museum. And the world over, it is still today known as the Gandhi home. And so when MLK landed in Bombay, he told his host, he said, I want to go to Gandhi's house immediately. The first stop has to be to Gandhi's house. So on his way to the hotel where he was going to stay during his stay in Bombay, they stopped at Mani Bhavan, which is the museum to my great-grandfather now. And there is one room on the second floor of that museum, which was the room that my great-grandfather used as his office during the day. It has been kept the same way as it used to be during my great-grandfather's time. And they've glassed it up and the door remains closed, so visitors can only see it from outside. MLK requested the director of the museum to allow him to step into the room, and he said, I want to be as close to where Gandhi used to sit. And so they opened the room for him, and he went. There was this mattress on which my great-grandfather would sit and work during the day and meet people. And MLK went and sat on the floor next to the mattress. And he requested everybody else to leave him alone. And he just sat meditating over there. And hours just went by, and then it was time to close the museum. So the director went up to MLK and whispered to him and said, Dr. King, we have to close the museum, so you will have to now leave. And Dr. King shocked her, and he said, no, I'm going to stay over here. I want to stay in Gandhi's home. And the director was absolutely shocked. He said, we don't have the facilities for you to stay over here. This is a museum and library. And Dr. King said, just give me a bed sheet on the floor. I'll sleep on the floor, but I'm not going anywhere. When the director realized that Dr. King was determined to stay there, they hurriedly made place for him in one of the rooms at the rear. And then for the 4 days that Dr. King stayed in Bombay, every day he would go out for his official functions and engagements and come back in the evening, go into the room where my great-grandfather worked, sit by his mattress, and then sleep in the museum. And then when he left, he wrote in the visitor's book, he said, I have been in communion with Gandhi for the past 4 days, and I have felt his presence around me, his aura surrounding me. And it has recharged my resolve to go and fight for the rights of my people. And I go back a strong man with a will to work for the rights of my people. There was a corollary to this story. I have been narrating this story wherever I've been abroad to show the influence of my great-grandfather on world leaders. And at that time, one of MLK's daughters was also at the function in London when I narrated this story. So after my talk was over, she came up to me and she said, Tushar, now I know what happened, because after my father came back from India, we all sensed that he had changed. And he said, we as children were terrified by it. So I said, why, what happened? And she said, when we gathered together in our family home, sat down for meals, my father would always tell us that we need to prepare to give up all these creature comforts and go and live in poverty and be one with our people. And she said, I was so scared that one fine day, my father was just going to grab me by my hand and walk out and say, now we are going to live on the streets. And she said, now I know who caused all that. It was your great-grandfather. So this was the kind of influence that he had, not only on people that were there during his time, his contemporaries, but people who were far removed from him, both physically and geographically, and by time. And yet, that influence still persisted. And then it, of course, went down to Nelson Mandela, and then everywhere where the battle of right against might continues even today. The methods of my great-grandfather give a lot of strength to the people. I see a hand raised.
Go ahead.
Thank you
Rahu has
so-
his hand raised.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Tushar Bey. And this is the second time I'm seeing you, so thank you so much for your presentation. I have a simple question. Well, not a simple question. It's about the Truth and Reconciliation process that happened in South Africa, and it was very supported by everyone, and in hindsight, everyone still supports it. Now, the Supreme Court in India has asked Kashmir to have a truth and reconciliation process. And as you pointed out, when you point the finger at someone and you start making accusations, when you are looking at punishment, it brings in a different energy, a different spirit, as opposed to bringing in forgiveness. But it doesn't seem like there's very much of a political will or a impetus to do that in Kashmir.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
unfortunately today, politicians in India have discovered the power of hate in electoral politics. And so, unfortunately, today hate prevails in India. We are going through election process, and the Prime Minister himself recently to criticize the election manifesto of the rival party, the Congress, branded it as a manifesto of the Muslim League. Now, as soon as you talk or brand something as Muslim League, the Islamophobic sentiment is pandered to, and also it goes back because India hasn't forgiven the Muslim League for the partition and the creation of Pakistan. And so all these things are played to by the simple reference of branding something to be of the Muslim League. And so this is the kind of situation that we are in, and that's where the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's emphasis on reconciliation and forgiveness is not too fashionable and popular in India, unfortunately. India has drifted away from the Gandhian ideology to a very extremist ideology of the present day. And so, unfortunately, yes, it doesn't find too many backers. And because you mentioned the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I must say that that was the only thing that helped South Africa survive, because otherwise South Africa would have ended up in a bloodbath that humanity hasn't seen so far. And it was just Nelson Mandela's emphasis on the truth and reconciliation, forgiveness aspect of reconciliation that has helped South Africa survive till now.
Can I ask you a second part to that question? Second part is just that, do you think then some kind of healing, there has to be some kind of closure? Like with the 1948 partition created a lot of hurt, a lot of injury, a lot of sorrow. And a lot of that was buried until there's a 1948 partition group in San Francisco bringing up the stories again in order to bring some healings. Do you think that there needs to be some kind of witnessing of the trauma that took place on a national level of some sort in order to bring some closure?
I think the memories must not be lost. We must remember what happened, but it should not become an encouragement to seeking revenge for it. The memory should be used to heal the trauma rather than to perpetuate the anger and resentment. And unfortunately, that is not happening. We are continuously being reminded, and that again, once again, this whole politics of hatred that is thriving in India today. We saw that 2 years back, the Prime Minister announced that 14th of August would be commemorated as the Partition Horrors Commemoration Day. 14th of August is also the day Pakistan was created out of India. And so that is the kind of viciousness that we need to counter.
We have a question here from Melissa Kinsler. Melissa, go ahead.
Thank you.
Oh, hello. Thank you. Forgive me. I'm in a situation where I can't turn my camera on. I apologize. Mr.
That's
Gandhi,
right.
thank you for what you said in the opening and the way that you spoke about the climate of today and the threat against humanity that we're dealing with. That resonated with me. I'm an alumni of this program, and I'm a very new and budding peace builder. I recently built a mediation program for the 250,000 refugees in the Kakuma camp in Kenya, the refugee camp,
Mhm.
to help them
Mhm.
settle their conflicts and differences within their own community. As you know, there are several different kinds of cultures there, and that leads to a lot of conflict. Can you tell me what other communities around the world might need this kind of peace building, or where we could be of service in that way?
Well, I think there's no dearth of such places, especially wherever you have ancient cultures a bit slow in the process of modernization. You will find these internecine conflicts. The world can not have enough of people
Yes.
wanting to mediate in conflicts and resolve them and help prevent future conflicts. I don't think
I know it's an
once
enormous
you are
question.
in the field, you will have any shortage of work. Unfortunately, I have to say that.
We have
Thank
My
you.
own country, my own country, we are divided on every possible yardstick of division, of divisiveness, of caste, of gender, of economic disparities, of regionalities. Every you name it, and we are divided on that, and that leads to conflict, and that is prevalent in many of the countries with old cultures and with mixed cultures or mixed economic groups living within them. Africa, Asia, Europe, parts of Europe are all Latin America. Everywhere
Can
you
you
see, you will see those symptoms and say, signs in society.
could you
we have
name one or two organizations that you work with in your country in those conflicts?
So there are lots of them, more of individuals working in communities, helping them, becoming helping hands. Uh, we have many others. We have uh, individuals and groups working in communal sphere. We have individuals who go and work in the constitutional manner. I myself have intervened in appealing to the Supreme Court of India
Mhm.
when the cow vigilante mob lynchings were happening more and more frequently in India. I had to go to the Supreme Court for it to order the law enforcement agencies to work to prevent those mob lynchings and the
Wow.
cow vigilante mobs. And so, in many spheres, we are working in Jammu and Kashmir. There's a lot of work happening in the northeast of India. There's a lot of work happening. We've had Mizoram that has been burning in India, where we need help, and there are lots of organizations working there, lots of individuals working there too. Unfortunately, India has a very fragile psyche, and as soon as international help starts volunteering to work in resolving conflicts, they feel that their internal affairs are being internationalized, and
Mhm.
so we start going on the offensive against them. Unfortunately, instead of being grateful, we become aggressive towards this thing. And so we have people like me in India have realized that if we really want to resolve conflicts in our nation, we will have to work and not wait for international aid. That doesn't mean that we don't require international help. You're most welcome to work with us to settle these things.
Let's move to our
Thank
thank you. We'll move to our next question in the interest of time. Adam, I think you have a question.
Yeah, so I I really like the concept of the conflict avoidance before, because we are I'm Adam Tenori from PAX Mediation Center, but we are working on a program in Tennessee right now. We're based out of Tennessee, and we're working on a program with the school district to teach conflict resolution, which now I'm gonna have to add conflict avoidance. So I was just curious, do you have, what kind of materials do you have that I could maybe look over for conflict avoidance? What kind of techniques do you use for conflict avoidance? Because we're trying to teach it in the schools so that they grow up, avoiding conflict, knowing how to manage conflict.
Unfortunately, I haven't come across any textbook that would help do that. I have so far been relying on personal experience to work for this, where one needs to be very alert. I'll give you an example. We've had many conflicts happening in India, mostly on the communal level, and it has resulted in severe tragedies. One of the things was the temple issue, where the atavistic need for to avenge the historic fact occurrence where the Islamic emperors who ruled over India were accused of having demolished some of our sacred temples and built mosques on top of that. When the Hindu extremist wing started talking about building the temple over there, we just did not realize how provocative that whole thing would be and what an inferno it would light. And that entire situation taught us lessons of realizing the potential of mischief to turn into conflict. So at the present moment, unfortunately, I cannot recommend any kind of textbooks to you, because we're just learning from our own experiences and developing our own methods for that. Maybe a decade down the line, there will be reference material. But what I would suggest is to study conflicts that have happened and which have taken a big toll on society, and go to their roots, trace their roots to find out what triggered that and what made it grow to an extent where it became such a tragedy. And out of that, maybe a methodology of teaching conflict avoidance could be evolved. I think, I would like to throw it out as a task for this group of people who have so much experience in this field to start working on texts that can be used, or training manuals that can be handed out for this kind of conflict avoidance.
We have a question from Jacqueline Lee. Jacqueline, go ahead.
Student at the master's program at Cal State Dominguez. And I'm also, my mentor is Daisaku Ikeda, which I think you're familiar with him. He was a great peace builder. And listening to you, he wrote The Human Revolution. He said that a great human revolution in just a single individual will help achieve a change in the destiny of a nation, further change in the destiny of humankind. I know that your great-grandfather, Mahatma Gandhi, reflects that, but, for me as an ordinary person, I can't see how one person can change humankind. And I just wanted to see if you could share something in relation to that. Thank you.
I think we are being too unkind to ourselves, not understanding the power of the individual. I think maybe an individual cannot bring about a revolution, but an individual can definitely start a revolution, a journey towards change can be triggered by every individual. I think that's what my great-grandfather also did, because both in South Africa and in India, when he arrived on the scene, the victims were resigned to their fate and believed that it was their fate to be subjugated, and they had to suffer the consequences of that subjugation. And it was only when he started raising his voice and saying, no, we don't need to face that, or like Dr. King, he took up the voice of the voiceless and instilled the confidence in his people that if they wanted civil rights, they had to sacrifice for it, and in order to gain those equal rights and justice. And so, no, I don't agree with the fact that a single person can't bring about. Maybe a single person can't bring about the change that they wish in their own lifetimes. But if they dedicatedly work towards it, they will inspire others to continue that work. And slowly, like a farmer who plants a fruit tree in the autumn years of his life and nurtures it, knows that he may not enjoy the fruits of that tree that he has planted and nurtured to full growth, but he still does it because he knows that that tree will provide fruits to his descendants, his family, his family that will come after him, the generations that come after him. And for change, also we need to be. That's why my father called himself a peace farmer. He said, I just keep planting seeds of peace with the hope that some of them will germinate and there will be a crop, a peaceful crop of peacemakers, peace workers. I think we just need to do what we can without telling ourselves that we are insignificant and no matter what we do, it will not have any consequence. I think that is a very defeatist mindset, and we need to get out of that and believe in our ability to make a difference, because all of us have that ability to make a difference.
We have a question from Kurt Kruger, and then we'll move on to our next panel. Kurt, you want to go ahead?
Namaste. I so appreciate your being here.
Thank you,
Mr. Gandhi. And what you just said about this, one individual can make a difference. At least makes a difference in the neighborhood. It at least makes a difference in your own family, and so on and so forth. And as that spreads, it goes. I put into some other things you mentioned about prevention. That is the most important thing, because when we educate people with values, I put into the chat a number of different programs that are really, really well researched and well affecting. One of which I believe is the best, which is the Living Values Education Program. And that had, within 2 years of implementation at a refugee camp, they had over 90% reduction in violence. And Diane Tillman went down to Johannesburg, where my wife is from, and she designed a program for the street people. Same kind of results. Let's bring it into the school system. She has a book on parenting even. And it's a beautiful name. Dig this name. Nurturing with love and wisdom. Disciplining with peace and respect. Mindful parenting is the subtitle. Had she named it Mindful Parenting, it might have sold millions, but with that long title, it didn't sell the millions. But thank you so much for being here. I put a whole bunch of stuff in there in the chat. So.
My pleasure, sir. My pleasure. And this triggers another response from me, that also we have to realize that the methods that we use also result in the ends that we achieve. Many a times in our ambition to resolve conflicts, we make compromises. And in those compromises, the seeds of future conflict are sown. And that is where my great-grandfather always talked about the importance of methods in what we do, the ethicality, and being led by the absolute truth and not compromising on that. He made it so important. I'll just give you an example of the first movement he started in 1920 of the civil disobedience. This was after 1857. This was the biggest mass movement against the British. And the British were very surprised by the support that my great-grandfather's call for action gave. And so they cracked down brutally. It resulted in a small village in North India. It resulted in the mob getting out of control because the police beat them up mercilessly. The mob goes into a frenzy and they torch the police station and kills about 8 policemen in that frenzy. And the British administration went to town criticizing my great-grandfather's non-violent movement and said, look, this is what Gandhi's non-violent movement was all about. Everybody at that point of time thought that the British were on the verge of capitulating. They would accept the Indian demand for home rule at that point of time. But my great-grandfather withdrew the agitation. And he fasted till that agitation was brought to a halt. He said, my people are not ready for my method of struggle. I need to treat them. And for the next 10 years, he conducted training classes in his ashram to train his commandos in nonviolent passive resistance. And when, after 10 years, he embarked on the next phase of independent movement with his Salt March, he did not throw it open to the entire country. He said, me and my 80 handpicked people from my commune will conduct the initial satyagraha, and then you will all take it up from there. And this is something that many a times we do not follow in when we jump into conflicts. We are so much in a rush to achieve the resolution of that conflict that we make compromises, we cut corners, and all that leads to the future unrest. And so when we talk about conflict prevention and conflict resolution, the purity of means has also to be kept as the most important ingredients in achieving our goals.
Thank you, Tushar. If people have questions, we hold them to the end and we can come back and look at those questions. We will need now to move on to, we need to go over to Ukraine. We're going to head over to Ukraine. And there, Brian is going to introduce David Rubens. Welcome, David. Brian, would you go ahead and introduce David? I'm going to introduce Joana Kaminska after that. So
Yeah.
thank you.
I met David as a result of work in Ukraine, and David Rubin is a man of many faces and lives, and he could be working in a kibbutz in the Middle East. He could be in an ashram in India, and he seems to have a little bit of everything going on, but he's a guy who gets things done. And David runs he's the CEO for the Institute for Strategic Risk Management. And when it comes to risk mitigation and exposure to risk and thinking things through and look at problems, David's your go-to guy. I don't know if I want to say anything else because some of the stuff he works on may be behind the screen, but he kind of goes with Tushar in terms of we need to collect information, have good background information to effectively analyze conflict so that we can intervene early and prevent things from getting super violent. And that's basically David in a small nutshell, but there's more that he can add to it. So that's David. Brian, do you want David to go first? Or you want to introduce
No,
John?
let's go ahead, David, and then I'll then come over to Joana, who's standing by to speak. Thank you, David. Go ahead. Yeah, thanks, Brian. Cheers.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Brian, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I feel that I'm under false pretenses, having both heard the speakers so far and the questions, having seen the community of people here, I feel that I'm an outlier. I deal in conflict zones, but I'm not sure that I deal in conflict resolution. That is a parallel path to where I'm at. What I do think I deal with is societal reform and post-conflict recovery and reconstruction in its various guises. So I'm going to talk about what I know, and I hope that it will have some resonance to everybody in their own personal perspective, and talk about some of the things that have been happening in Ukraine. Because, of course, at the moment, it's possible to say that Ukraine and Palestine and the horrific things that are happening in the Gaza Strip and that have taken on the news headlines. But of course, those are the incidents that we know about because they're in the news headlines. There's multiple similar cases of genocide, of starvation, of injustice, of alienation, of human movements that we don't hear about. And for many of the people I talk about, their attitude towards Ukraine is that the only reason that's of interest to you is because those people look like you. And in other places of the world, people are suffering in exactly the same way and for many of the same reasons, which is an imbalance of power, political reasons, short-termism, a desire to dominate. And those are as real as the ones that we see in our daily news feeds. But let me talk about Ukraine as a microcosm of what a conflict does to a society and the challenges that it faces. I was approached, the invasion of Ukraine was on the 24th of April, 2022. So that's 2 years ago.
February.
And on the 28th, sorry, 22nd of February, my mistake, 22nd of February. No, let's start again. 24th of February, 2022. Sorry, it's not as late here as it is in India, but it is after 9 o'clock in the evening. Right? It's been a long day. So the invasion was on the 24th of February, 2022. On the 28th of February, so 4 days later, I was approached by somebody in the Ukrainian government. And we must remember at that time that the smart money was that Putin and his people would be in Kiev within a week. Zelensky would be gone, and there would be a Moscow puppet regime running Ukraine, and that the West would come to terms with that. Very quickly, the West would accept that and basically get to terms with the new reality. That was where the smart money was. Before the invasion, the Americans were calling it to the hour. They must have had incredible intelligence because they were giving pretty well 3 to 6 hourly updates on the hour that the Russians would invade. The EU was saying they would not invade, so there was ambiguity there. But 4 days after the invasion, I was approached and I was asked to offer a platform through the Institute of Strategic Risk Management to a spokesman for the Ukrainian government to go out and make a statement to the world that we're still here, we're not going to go away, and we're not going to lose, which I did. And that went quite well. And then I was approached a week later, and they said, David, thank you very much for that. Could you please put together a discussion group between London, Washington, and Kiev about weapons acquisition, because we really need weapons. And I said, that's not really what I do. I'm not really comfortable with that. It's not my thing. And a week later, they came back to me and said, right, forget weapons. We've got that under control. Can you put together a discussion group, London, Washington, Kiev, about post-conflict recovery and reconstruction? I said, oh, that's much more interesting. And that's exactly what we did. And we brought together about half a dozen people from London, half a dozen people, about 4 people from Washington, and then about 6 people from Kiev. And I didn't realize it at the time, but these were the heads of the directorates of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, NSDC. And under the wartime conditions, the National Security and Defense Council had stepped up, and the Council of Ministers, which was political and civilian, had stepped down, and the NSDC became the strategic policy setting chaired by Zelensky, by President Zelensky himself. And we had unknown to me, the 6 heads of directorates. We had this discussion, they liked it, it seemed well. I wrote a report, as one does, and I was then in June, I was invited to Ukraine. At the time, Russian forces were still close to Kiev. There was Bucha, which I'm sure you remember as a horrific site of massacres. I was taken to Bucha to have a look at it. But what was clear in Ukraine at the time was, first of all, the first thing that was absolutely clear was there was not 1% of 1% of 1% doubt that they would have victory. There was just, that was not a thing. They had absolute conviction that they would win. The second thing that was clear was, right from the start, and I spent on my opening day, I spent 2 hours with Alexei Danilov, who was the Secretary of the National Defense Council of Ukraine. He's just been taken relieved of his post just about last month. So he's now ambassador to Oslo, so he's still in good standing. But what was clear was that from the Ukrainian perspective, this was an opportunity. This invasion from Russia was an opportunity. And what it was an opportunity to finally, after over 30 years, finally lose their post-conflict legacy. Sorry, their post-communist legacy. Because for 30 years, Ukraine had still been a communist legacy country. Whereas the countries of Scandinavia, the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or Poland and Czechoslovakia, they had dropped that completely. They were modern states. And Ukraine had never lost them. So right from the beginning, it was seen as an opportunity to recreate Ukraine. And we did some stuff around that, and that was very, very interesting. And then in 2022, in October 2022, I was invited back to Ukraine. And what was interesting was that the conversation had developed and mutated. And one part of the conversation was still post-conflict recovery and reconstruction. But another part of the conversation was post-conflict national transformation. And it was seen very much that it was a space led from the very top of the political, academic, social, business groups in Ukraine, that this was an opportunity to redesign Ukraine, not in terms of recovery and reconstruction, but in terms of national transformation. And they asked me for some reason, they said, what do you think about that? And it seemed to me that that was an interesting thing. And I just want to explain why that was interesting within a Ukrainian context, because I think it has value and connectivity to conflict and post-conflict regions around the world. So if you talk about post-conflict recovery and reconstruction, you're basically talking about engineering. You're talking about engineering. You can basically engineer those solutions. You bring in people who know about roads and transport and logistics and energy and et cetera, et cetera. It's a massive, complex program, but it is nevertheless an engineering program. But if you talk about post-conflict national transformation, that is ecology, that's biology, that's a different thing. That's developing your ecosphere and trying to work out how you do that. And last time I was in Ukraine, I was invited back, which was February of this year, so it's a couple of months ago. I was invited to join the National Security Defense Council Strategic Policy Commission. As far as I know, there's only one other non-Ukrainian person on that. And I was asked if I could articulate what that means. What does post-conflict national transformation look like? Which I have done, and that is now under discussion at the highest levels of Ukrainian political leadership. And there was a reason that one of the things that they said to me when I was there was, can we make this happen? We've had the Deloittes and we've had the KPMGs and we had Ernst & Young's come in. We've had the World Bank and the OECD and the European Bank of Reconstruction. And they've given us the same stories we've been hearing for 30 years. None of us believe them. We don't think they believe it. Can we do it? Is this something that is real? And that's a good question. That's a good question. A tough question is a good question. And I said that I had absolutely no doubt that given the right support, we could do it. I said, and I will justify what I say. And this is when you look at something like, for example, the Gaza Strip, or you look at what's happening in East Africa, for example, Yemen, Sudan, Somalia, Myanmar, and so many other places. There's a reason why Ukraine can do it. And the problem with most places where you try and do post-conflict recovery and reconstruction or national transformation is that they are, in their very essence, failed states. They are failed states. That is the only way to describe them. They do not have the infrastructure to manage themselves. And if you go there and you have the good desire to do good work, as we all do, your first problem is, who do I talk to? Who do I talk to? You go to Libya, there's nobody to talk to in Libya. There isn't. You go to Somaliland, there is nobody to talk to who you can do this with. But in Ukraine, you can. And the first mistake people make about Ukraine is, well, Ukraine is not a failed state. Ukraine is a very successful state that is in trouble. And there's a difference between that. Anybody who knows anything about the old Soviet Union knows that pretty well everything that was good in the Soviet Union came out of Ukraine. They're intellectuals, they're poets, they're warriors, they're scientists, they're academics. Pretty well all came out of Ukraine. That is the truth of the matter. And so what we want to do is, when we look at post-conflict recovery and reconstruction, the thing is, well, what's the first thing? Where's our first victory? Where can we win? Where can we plant a seed? Or where we can build the foundation that allows us to grow everything else from that? And there's a number of approaches that you can take. But the first question really is there a functioning infrastructure? Is there a functioning infrastructure? I have recently been involved in a EU-funded program for 3 years in Indonesia called BUILD, Building Universities for Leading in Disaster Resilience. And what we did was we worked with 8 universities spread out across Indonesia. And what we wanted to do was to build each university as the center of excellence. Because in those regions, the university is almost certainly the most mature institute. Certainly it's more mature than a lot of the political institutes. It has a structure, it has leadership, it is probably international in perspective, it has networks, it has resources, etc., etc. It has the students. And within those 8 universities in Indonesia, under this Building Universities Leading in Disaster Resilience program, we try to create 3 vectors of influence for each university. And the first vector was upwards, to help create better policy. Now that could be at the government, national government level, state government level, city government level, it didn't matter. But let's create stronger, more effective, more structured policy. The second vector was downwards. Let's make sure that we have community ownership and engagement, that the community feels that they are part of the dialogue. And the third vector was outwards, to create networks, local networks, national networks, international networks, whatever they might be. When we looked at what we were doing in Ukraine, we had a similar sort of perspective. What is it that we can use as our first sticking point? And the truth of the matter is, Ukraine is actually quite easy to work in, because they've got ministries and they've got fantastic universities, they've got educated young people, etc., etc. But when we go anywhere in the world, the first thing that we really look at when we decide we want to stay there, when we want to build ourselves as somebody part of the dialogue, once we understand that we can do, and the thing about peacekeeping is, and peacemaking, you need to be in peace. We do not go into war zones. I mean, I go to Ukraine, but to be honest, most of Ukraine is not a war zone. If you're in Kiev or in Lviv, you don't feel you're in a war zone, to be honest. There's rockets coming in. It's not a real war zone. But what we try and do, and I think is something that will resonate with everybody here, is we try and understand what good education means. What does good education mean? In the schools, in the universities, in the political aspect of it, in the community aspect. We are now, right now, this week, in discussions with the International Federation of the Red Cross, and we have a very good personal relationship with Javier Castellanos, who is the Undersecretary General, so the number 2 person. We've been discussing this since COVID about creating a legacy program. But they are about to announce with us, in partnership with the ISRM, that they are going to create a community leadership program. And they're going to put 10,000 people through that in the next 3 years in partnership with us. And that is designed to plant the seeds that will have a legacy. This is a generational legacy program. So I don't want to take up too much time, and I appreciate that I've been jumping around bits in there, but I think it is because I'm not quite sure where my landing point is for this audience. But hopefully what I've said has some resonance to you. We're all of us trying to make a difference. We're trying to move the needle. But if I can just finish off by saying what we bring to the game, the ISRM brings to the game, and I think will have resonance with what you do here, is that on one side of the equation, one side of the scale, there is mission statement and objectives. There is strategy 2030, there's vision 2030, etc., etc. None of which means very much, to be honest. I mean, you look at COP26, COP28, does that move anything? But I think that what every single person here is trying to achieve is 3 things at the end of the day. And the 3 things that we are all trying to achieve is influence, impact, and legacy. And from our perspective, when we look at that, we think we're bringing the connector between objectives and aspirations and Vision 2030 and impact, influence, impact, and legacy. And what we bring is structure and methodology. And it seems to me that when we talk about climate change or poverty eradication or whatever it might be, the words are fine, but I don't see where is the structure and the methodology. And what we do at the ISRM, I think is why we're recognized as we're a very young, we're only 5 years old, we're a young institute, but I think we are seen as an institute of influence and significance. We put together specifically to create a platform where academics and policymakers and practitioners could come together to have a grown-up conversation about the challenges we're facing. But I think that if each of us in our own ways, to go back to what previous people have said, each of us in our own ways, in our own operating environment, offer a vision of the structure and methodology which we brought to play to allow the other things to happen, it seems to me that that will be a move of significance that in its own way will make the world a better place. So thank you, Brian, for the opportunity to share this with you. I hope it's of some interest and relevance to what you're doing, but it's been a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much.
Thank you, David. That was actually terrific. You're right on point, actually. We're just going to, in the interest of time, we'll go right over to Joana Kaminska, and then we'll take questions after on the Ukraine portion. So bear with us here. So Joana, I met you through the Eisenhower. You had actually received the Eisenhower Award, and then you were going across the United States, talking and connecting with various university programs. You connected with Brian Polkinghorn in Maryland and others. And but I should say just quickly 3 points about you that are very interesting and people should know. One, you're the advisor in the mediation team for the European Parliament to support the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine in reforming parliamentary processes. That's the first thing. Secondly, you were also the advisor of the President of the European Parliament from 2019 to 22, the European President on Foreign and Security Affairs for Europe. And thirdly, you've written a book recently, and the book is on Poland. It's Poland and the EU Enlargement, Foreign Policy and Transition. That's your latest book. So we'll go right to you, Joana, and go ahead, and then we'll take questions. Okay, thanks.
Hi, everyone. It's very nice to see you all here and contribute to this discussion. I have a couple of parallels with David, who said that he perhaps is a little bit of a outsider here, and I also feel a little bit as an outsider because what I actually do is more a dialogue facilitation and supporting parliamentary diplomacy from the side of the European Parliament in Ukraine. And therefore, I feel to a certain extent that the two of us, me and David, are in this conversation for a reason, because there is this parallel well on Ukraine, on perhaps being a bit of outsiders, and also on the major topic of national transformation of Ukraine. So to give you a little overview of what we are doing in the European Parliament that is composed of the members of the European Parliament, so people elected from the entire European Union. We have a special program to help the parliamentarians from outside the EU in the situation when they feel that they need some support in dialogue between different political parties. They can ask us to facilitate this dialogue, and usually it's at the request of the speaker of the partner parliament. So that means that the partner country, like Ukraine, has asked the European Parliament president to provide some kind of dialogue facilitation between political parties in Ukraine. And this is the kind of tool that we offer in the European Parliament to support the democratic transformation and different democracy building processes in third countries. So I have been working on Ukraine in this context 2 years now. I have been working on Ukraine for 15 years, and I have joined the mediation team 2 weeks before the war started. So I have been asked to work the team on Ukraine because I knew people in the Ukrainian parliament. And of course, as you know, in dialogue facilitation and mediation, trust building is a key issue. So as I knew the people, I knew who to talk to, and that's how we kind of started this kind of closer cooperation. I went to Ukraine 6 times since the war started. David said it's not a war zone really when you go to Kiev or Lviv, but I can assure you that each time it gets worse. In the last 6 months, you really had a huge deterioration of the situation in Kiev even. There is almost a constant bombing, and the air defense is really not able to intercept all the missiles. So all this mediation round, all the conversation, all the dialogue facilitation is usually done in a pretty, I would say, difficult conditions currently, where you constantly need to go to the shelter and be in this kind of anxiety state wherever you are in Ukraine. So that, of course, adds quite a lot to the situation on the ground. But the work itself that we are doing is we are bringing all leaders of the political parties in Ukraine in one place, and we help them to reach a consensus or agreement on the most important issues that are currently being faced by Ukraine. So if it's legislation, for example, on the issues related to some important things like enlargement to the EU, like mobilization law, like relations between different political parties, whatever it's difficult for them to reach, we are there to offer to facilitate this dialogue between them. All these rounds are very small. It's party leaders that participate in them, but all the conclusions of our dialogues are public. So whatever it's signed after each round of mediation or the dialogue facilitation is an official agreement between all political forces. So during the war, we already had 3 of such a round of dialogue, and those have been very fruitful. So we are trying to kind of help maybe foster a new culture, which is a culture of the discussion, an open and frank discussion between political parties in Ukraine, and try to help them to reach this possibility of having a discussion where zero is not an option. This is one of our main rules in this conversation. So always, each time when we are having conversation between political parties, we need to have some kind of proper, concrete results in order to have an agreement and then implement this agreement later on. As you can imagine, the situation is very tense. We also are working on the reforming the parliament. This is one of our kind of main issue currently, try to help out. I mean, I don't know if you are aware of the situation in the Ukrainian parliament, where unfortunately the members of parliament are not replaced if they leave their seat, so the parliament is shrinking, and therefore it's much more difficult to reach the majority currently, and therefore this compromise and coalition building in the Ukrainian parliament is crucial. You probably are aware the parliaments are those places where most of the agreements are actually ratified, so whichever agreement is going to be reached in Ukraine, it needs to be ratified by the parliament, and therefore it's very important that all major political parties are on the board when it comes to the agreements, when it comes to the future of the country and the priorities. So this is our role from the side of the European Parliament, to be this kind of actor of consensus and compromise building, and trying to facilitate it for other parliaments. So it's part of the parliamentary diplomacy, I would say. Our team is relatively new. It's a very, we are working on Ukraine, on other countries, but Ukraine is the most advanced and the most intense country currently. And it has been a very fascinating and rewarding job. Maybe not a typical mediation, but we are using a lot of tools in order to foster this dialogue between political parties. So I'm happy to respond to any questions and have a discussion with David on the future of Ukraine and how we actually are bringing this transition and also fostering a new culture in Ukraine when it comes to dialogue and trying to reach agreements on the priorities for the future.
Thank you, Joana. Let's move to the floor for questions for David and Joana. Questions on Ukraine or in general, anything you'd like to ask about them, their experience. Questions from the floor. Anybody like to ask a question or answer or comment? It can be a comment and question.
Hi. I had a question. Listening to Mr. Rubens and Mr. Gandhi speaking about predicting conflict, trying to mitigate, and then post-reconstruction after, conflicts and things. And I hear a lot about the politics, and I'm wondering where you factor in the cultures that you're dealing with in those types of conversations. Is this a thing where we have a better idea, you need to adapt to the idea that we have? Or is it, this is what the cultural landscape looks like, this is what's contributing to the conflict, and how do we mediate between that?
Who would like to take that question? Thanks, Susan. Great question. Who would like to take a shot at that?
The problem with these conflicts is the memories go back hundreds and hundreds of years. You can still get punched in Northern Ireland for something that happened in 1684, literally. And so what happens is these goes deep. We've seen this in the Balkans, we've seen it in Balkans, we've seen it in Rwanda, in so many places. General Stan McChrystal, who many of you will know about, Team of Teams and stuff like that, involved in Afghanistan. But his basic rule was, if you came from Washington to Afghanistan and you thought you had an answer, you had to leave the room, because clearly you had no idea what was going on. And the idea that we can come in and in our wisdom have a way of resolving these issues that have been on the ground for hundreds of years and generations are inbuilt, I think that's a fallacy. We can be facilitators. We can be connectors. We can bring resources. But the idea that we can come in and solve the problem, I think, is a category error. I think, and that is a paradox. And of course, the thing about it is as Westerners, we often do believe that we have, we come in. I've seen it, for example, in business. I spent 2.5 years running an American company as a CEO in Nigeria in 2013 to 2015. But we saw people who'd come in from the outside thinking they could sort out Nigeria's problems in 6 weeks. And you go, you clearly, you're coming with the wrong attitude. So I think it's potentially a paradigm issue about how we define our relationship to what's going on. And if it's that we will bring in our wisdom, some solution that nobody's ever heard of before, and that will solve the problem, in my opinion, that's the wrong paradigm. paradigm to bring to the game. I'm not sure what the right one is, but that's the wrong one.
Very good.
Well,
And-
if
yeah, you want?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
If I may, I think that this is the major problem of kind of approach to conflict resolution, kind of coming and believing that we can sort out any problem anywhere. And you have a team of people that basically work on every country, no matter if it's Africa, Colombia, if it's Ukraine and so on. And the people have a set of skills and go there and try to sort out the conflict. But it's not possible, according to me. I mean, I'm Polish myself. I've been working on Ukraine for 15 years. I feel this is I speak Russian, I speak Polish, I understand Ukrainian. I think it's culturally also, I have a lot of understanding for this region. And I think it helps me, actually, because a lot of cultural norms are similar. A lot of codes are similar. And I don't even pretend that I want to sort out anything there. I always work with the locals. We always work with local actors and people that are there, the NGOs, the civil society, local members of parliament, national members of parliament, the different organizations. And then we just kind of use the tools that we have, that maybe we have developed, how to conduct the dialogue, how to do certain things to kind of facilitate it between them. But we are very much in the background trying just to facilitate and empower those local actors. But all the cultural map is there and all the solution is on their side. We also don't offer, at least from our side, any solutions. We just kind of tried to facilitate maybe some kind of compromise. And according to me, this is the best approach to it. I mean, the solution needs to be done by the locals, because otherwise it's not going to stand for long if it's just kind of brought from outside. And then when you leave, then nobody will actually implement it because people don't feel an ownership for this solution. So it needs to be local actors. It needs to be those that are there that find those solutions. This is the only approach to me to conflict.
Thank you.
We have another question from Raju. In the interest of time, we'll move to that question and then move on to our next panel.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm wondering, I'm trying to put my head around identities, because a lot of the conflicts, even India, Pakistan, that's around identity. It was the false identities that were created, and then people start having conflicts. So I'm just wondering from the panelists here, are there artificial identities? Are there genuine identities? And how do these identities serve the power? Does the power use the identities in order to further its own interests, whatever those powers are? And by artificially creating these identities, if I could have some feedback. Thank you so much. I'm enjoying this so much.
David, Joana?
Joana, do you want to go first on this one? And then...
Yeah, no, I think that identity is everything, like if you look at the conflict, I think this is the major thing that a lot of people kind of get stuck on. They have a sense of belonging, that have a sense of identity, and that's where all the conflicts are starting. And I think this kind of understanding of the local context and identity is therefore crucial in order to at least acknowledge where someone is, and that you maybe to a certain extent respect it. And this is the first step forward, I would say. And I don't think that we can move beyond it when it comes to resolution of any conflict. That's at least how I feel it.
It's so interesting, Raju, because identity it goes down into our DNA, isn't it? And it's something that we have both the facade of the implied identity, and then the inbuilt identity, and then almost the soul level identity. But I mean, one of the mistakes that Putin made was that he thought that the Russian-speaking Ukrainians around the Crimea felt they were Russian, and he genuinely believed, and this is a mistake around his intelligence, but he believed that when Russian forces went in there, and he was building this up as basically basically rescuing them from Ukrainian genocidal attitudes towards them. He thought they would literally be greeted like the Americans in Paris in 1945. But those people said, well, listen, we may have come from Russia, we may speak Russian, but man, we're Ukrainians. That is not what we are looking for. And that was an example of just getting it wrong in the deep level. But I agree that the identity itself is so deeply rooted. From that, it is something inculcated within us. But that is possible both to mistake it, to be simplistic about it. But people can gain other identities. My grandparents' generation were Jews from Germany who escaped Nazism. Some escaped, some did not escape, but some escaped. But they always had that Germanic thing within them 40 years later, though they denied it and they lived their life and tried, but they had it within themselves. So it is deep. It is deep, and a great question, and I think too much for this particular. Yeah, but that's my response on that one. Thank you for that.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we're going to move to our next panel. Hold over questions to the end, and we'll come back with questions. But hold the questions. We're going to move now to Cyprus, North and South Cyprus, and there we have Ahmet Sozen, and we have Marco Turk. And what I'd like is to turn it to Peter De Caro to introduce Ahmet Sozen and tell us a little bit about Ahmet's work. And then I'll chat a little bit about Marco, and we'll go ahead. We'll do the same thing we just did. So Peter, would you go ahead and introduce Ahmet Sozen?
Yes, sir. Brian, before I get into that, I just got to say I've been doing this with you, what now, 12, 13 years?
Yes.
This is probably the best panel. I have an informative panel I have heard in those 12 or 13 years.
Thanks, Peter.
Phenomenal listening to those participants. Unbelievable.
Thank you.
In November 2014, I went to Northern Cyprus, and I had communicated with you, Brian, and Marco beforehand. And Marco told me about Ahmet, who was kind to see me when he was acting dean at the EMU. And I told him my background doing with mediation and conflict resolution, and he really gave me a history on what was happening in Cyprus and Northern Cyprus, and I loved it. Absolutely. I tried to get involved in the following years with the UN, but they didn't want to hear anything about it. So let me make the introduction. Let me first start off by saying Selam Lar. I think that's pronounced right. Okay. Greetings. Ahmet Sozen is professor of political science and international relations at Eastern Mediterranean University, Famagusta, Northern Cyprus, and the department chair. Professor Sozen is the founding director of Cyprus Policy Center, a think tank within EMU. And Professor Sozen received his Ph.D. in 1999 from the University of Missouri, Columbia. And during his Ph.D. dissertation fieldwork, which was on the Cyprus intercommunal peace negotiations, I want to get this right, Sozen was granted one of the 50 1997 Paul Harris Ambassadorial Peace Scholarships on International Conflict Resolution, given on a worldwide competition by International Rotary Foundation. Besides his university work, Professor Sozen is the founding Turkish Cypriot co-director of the UNDP-funded program Cyprus 2015, which operated first under Interpeace and later became the first intercommunal think tank called CSUDH, Center for Sustainable Peace and Democratic Development. Professor Sozen also served as the research director of CSUDH. Since 2014, together with Hubert Faustman, he has been writing the annual reports about Cyprus for the Political Data Yearbook of the European Journal of Political Research. And Professor Sozen has been very active on the policy and advocacy fronts. His experience over the last 30 years as a peace activist includes peace building and democratization processes, including participating in peace negotiations first in Cyprus, where Professor Sozen was a member of the official Turkish Cypriot negotiation team in the UN-led peace negotiations. Active involvement in second track peace and democratization initiatives, providing training and education in the areas of conflict resolution, mediation and peace building, designing policy recommendations based on objective participatory research with the societal stakeholders, and polling. Sozen has published extensively on the Cyprus conflict, conflict and peace processes, and Turkish foreign policy. He has given dozens of invited speeches on conflict resolution, including 2 TED Talks, the Cyprus conflict and Turkish foreign policy in various countries, and he frequently appears on both local and international media, such as Al Jazeera, Euronews, and BBC, where he comments on world leaders. And I know I've read Marco's book, and the two of you, Ahmet and Marco, were really fundamental in the initial peace negotiations. I think that was in the 70s, was it not, Ahmet?
Go ahead. So, well, why don't we go ahead, Ahmet, and then.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Thanks, Peter. I appreciate it. You're looking good, by the way.
Ah, thanks.
Okay. Ahmet, go ahead, and then we'll go to Mark.
Well, thank you so much. Pete, you've been very, very generous with your words. It's great to be here, and it's great to see some familiar faces among the people in the room. For the sake of time, I'm not going to give you a long talk. We can I can answer some of your questions, but just to say that the last 30-something years, I have been involved in various different tracks in Cyprus, including track 1, including track 2, 1.5. But I started when I met Marco Turk. I was a Ph.D. student and then a fresh young assistant professor with limited publication at that time, where my main focus was more on civil society and NGOs and role of NGOs and civil society in peace building. But later I tasted the others. As Pete mentioned, I was part of track 1, where I was within the negotiation team in the UN-led negotiations. But what I would like to do today is to focus on what I've been doing very extensively in the last couple of decades, which is I've been involved in track 2 diplomacy, not just in Cyprus, but also within the greater regional what we call Eastern Mediterranean or Mediterranean. Now, let me start with second track. Track 2 diplomacy generally refers to initiatives assumed outside of track 1, official diplomatic and decision-making channels. It is used as an instrument for fostering cooperation between and among adversarial groups and help resolving conflict. Track 2 diplomacy is usually employed when the conflicting sides either do not recognize one another, or when the parties to the conflict do not have direct communication or dialogue for various different reasons. In such cases, track 2 diplomacy can play an important role where creative and novel ideas and solutions are produced and channeled, if we are lucky, to track 1. Hence, the official decision makers who do not have a direct communication and dialogue with their counterparts on the other side of the dispute, nonetheless, they are presented with the track 2 blueprints to solve their outstanding conflicts. In that sense, if track 1 has the political will to solve their problems, they don't start from scratch. That they already have what track 2 produced to be used. But let me also say that track 2 diplomacy is neither a panacea nor a substitute to track 1. However, I believe that if it is used wisely and crafted smartly, it can be a valuable supplementary tool for traditional track 1 diplomacy. Now, personally, I have been deeply involved in several track 2 initiatives in the past 2 decades, mostly connected to Eastern Mediterranean region, either within the greater Mediterranean or in lieu to Middle East or in lieu to Greek-Turkish relations or the Cyprus conflict. I have been, for example, a member of Turkish Greek Forum, which is directly sponsored by the Turkish and Greek foreign ministries. It includes academics like myself, as well as retired diplomats. We've been coming together since late 90s. Another example, I have been a member of what is called Eastern Mediterranean Initiative, EMI, which started as a dialogue group in 2020 under the umbrella of Geneva Center for Security Policy. And finally, I've been a member of a very new association, which is called Diplomats, the association or the Council for Mediterranean Diplomacy, which tries to bring together experts, mostly conflict resolution experts from the Mediterranean region. So we have people from Israel, Lebanon, Palestine, Cyprus, Greece, Turkey, and whatnot. I've also been member of other regional track 2 initiatives, which are not publicly disclosed for the reason that we need to protect some of the participants. Just to give you an idea that you cannot have one Israeli and one Lebanese person in the same room. They cannot talk to one another. If it is known, the Lebanese person will be jailed in his or her country. So in that sense, some of the track 2 initiatives are basically behind closed doors and whatnot. Now, in order to summarize, I think that the most important value of track 2 that I've gained in the last 2 decades was that indeed new ideas are created in track 2 dialogues. For example, I remember that 14 years ago, myself and some of my Greek Cypriot friends came up with the idea of building a solar panel field in the UN buffer zone in Cyprus, which divides the 2 sides. And you know what? It's now being picked up by the European Council. 14 years ago, but nonetheless, we are happy that, that was an idea planted or produced 14 years ago, but nonetheless, whenever there is a goodwill or whenever there is the will of the decision makers, the ideas are there, that they don't start from scratch. I think that whenever there is a kind of same frequency between track 1 and track 2, then it becomes almost like the track 2, the supposedly track 2 becomes almost like track 1.5. Now, what I'm trying to say is that when the leader, in our case in Cyprus, the Turkish Cypriot leader, was somebody who was similar to our own ideology, meaning that we were working very closely, then the ideas produced in track 2 will be very easily channeled to track 1. And that's when you can actually make a difference, when you can actually see that what you do is actually having an impact on track 1. During 2008 to 2013, I was part of this research group, which I led together with my Greek Cypriot colleagues, where we were polling people. We were actually having public opinion polls on both sides of the Cyprus divide, as well as focus groups. And we were feeding the actual peace negotiations with these scientific data. In fact, Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General at that time, cited our results several times in his report to the Security Council. In fact, what we were aiming to do at that time was to integrate public polling and scientific research to the peace process. But unfortunately, at that time, the two leaders didn't accept that, but nonetheless, they agreed to work with us unofficially. And the negotiations at that time were very much fed by scientific data, and that's why a lot of progress was reached during 2008 and 2012 in Cyprus. But nonetheless, whenever leaders change, and there is always that that suspicion that track 1 has on track 2. Maybe like a fear that track 2 is going to replace them, but this is not a substantiated fear, in fact. That I mean, if I were somebody in track 1, I would definitely work very closely with objective researchers to see what ordinary people, for example, think, and to be able to hold the pulse of the public. But in any case, track 2 is very valuable, as some of you would also know very well that it was the Oslo Accords between Israel and Palestine. In a way, it was initiated by track 2 attempts. Track 2 can help, for example, less than 2 years ago, between Israel and Lebanon. Although here we have two countries who do not recognize one another, who are at war with one another, but nonetheless, they were able to agree on their maritime border issue. Track 2 played a very important role there, as well as the third-party intervention by the Special Envoy of United States, Amos Hochstein. But enough to say that even in cases where the two conflicting parties do not recognize one another, even there, by employing track 2 dialogue groups, creating new ideas and feeding them to track 1 can play a role. So I'm going to end my my intervention by saying that yes, track 2 is not a panacea, that track 2 is not going to replace track 1 at all, but if it is used wisely and crafted smartly, I think that at least in the area where I am coming from, I see a lot of potential to solve Eastern Mediterranean-based conflicts by employing more track 2 in the processes. Thank you so much. Again, I would like to thank CSU Domingo Hills, the Program on Negotiation and Conflict Resolution, and also thank Brian for inviting me to this conference, and it was a pleasure to at least see my old friend Marco Turk here on the screen.
Thank you, Ahmet. I really appreciate that. Just to summarize, so the track 2 is the more informal process where people are meeting. Families might be meeting of diplomats. It's a really informal peace, community kind of idea at the track 2. Over the track 1, more formalistic meetings that people have between countries. That just summarizes it, right? Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's why it's so powerful, because it's so informal. It's not formalized in the traditional sense. I'm going to move now to our former director, Marco Turk, who say a few words. We're a little behind time, I have to admit, so we'll take a question or two at the end. Marco is now teaching at Pepperdine University, the Strauss Institute over at Pepperdine. It's one of our sister programs. We welcome and work with Pepperdine, the people over there. He's the former director of our program and has written 2 books on Cyprus and has spent really a career, working on the North-South Cyprus issue problem and conflict, and attempting to bring parties together, to look at what's going on, to analyze it, and to bring some resolution. So yield the floor here to you, Marco, and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Brian, and thank you to Ahmet and everybody else participating and attending. Basically, I'm going on 89, and I'm still a newbie in all of this. I started out as a lawyer for 35 years and then accidentally became a so-called peace builder by getting a Fulbright senior scholarship to Cyprus, of which I knew nothing about at the time. And that's where I met Ahmet. And so I had to learn from the ground up, and I'm still learning, even though I'm teaching about this all the time. The thing that struck me most in what I was doing is that the people on the ground are so important. They're really more important than anybody else. And I don't look at, yes, I'm a late coming academic, so to speak, but I still look at this from a people point of view, people ground up. And so I learned that way, going to Cyprus, knowing nothing about where I was going and what I was doing, got there by accident, and learned from the people on the ground. I thought I could come in there and start telling everybody what to do because I was an academic at the time. But that's not true. You have to learn from the people on the ground because they have to live there. They have to go through all of that. And so we have to learn about the people and work with them and try to assist them rather than trying to tell them what to do. And that's the big lesson that I learned while I was there, is you need to talk to the people. You need to get involved with the people. You need to find out what they think, what they feel, what they have to say, what they have to say, and what they would like to see accomplished if possible. It's not the job of the academic to come in, for example, and tell them what to do and how to do it. You have to learn from the people. And from that, I learned that the way to resolve the problem, if it can be done, which probably can't, is that you have to solve it from the ground up and not from the top down. You have to find a way to get the people on the ground as well as the people on the top to buy into the situation where not that the people on the ground take over completely, but they need to be included, incorporated, and considered and involved with the people at the top so that the people at the bottom who are living all of this can benefit from what is being done and hopefully accomplished. So in the end, they can look back and say, gee, we did this all together. This is how we're going to go forward because we're a unit based on what we've learned and what we've tried to accomplish and what we'd like to see for the future. And that's how I got along without knowing what I was doing when I got there. And then in the end, I realized I had become an accidental peace builder, and I still am today doing the same thing. So I have to thank Dave Churchman, who's at this conference also, for bringing me into Cal State Dominguez Hills to succeed him as the director of the program, and also to Brian, who I hired as I was leaving Dominguez Hill to succeed me as the director of the program. I think he's done a fabulous job. I've looked at all these things he's done over the years, and he's a tribute to the profession, to academia, and to Cal State Dominguez Hills for what he's accomplished. And I'm delighted to be here and to see how this is going along. And hopefully it will lead to more things, bringing people from the ground up, as opposed to emphasizing the people at the top down. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Marco. Let's hold questions because we're a little bit tapped for time here. So let's go down to Brazil now. We'll have questions at the end. Let's go over to Brazil to Jay Damiani, who's the director of the Global Center for Peace and Conflict Resolution, just to say a few words about some of the work, Jay, you're doing down there at the center, and then we'll quickly move along. So for our last talk.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Brian. I would like to thank Michael Spagna and Jarrett, CSUDH as well. We had a great recent visit to Dominguez Hills a few weeks ago. It's a vibrant place, and we have been doing some work together, Brian, now for like the last 6 to 7 years, and I'm a big fan of your work. You asked me to talk first a little bit about GLIP. Let me start with my experience with peace work. I've been working in the area of dispute resolution for almost 4 decades now. I started with an East-West conflict program at Duke University in Berlin prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall. And from there, we moved to work with the UNHCR and the World Food Organization through the German Technical Cooperation in Western Africa. The past 2 decades, I have been working with indigenous populations, mostly in the Amazon and recently also in the southeastern part of Brazil. And I was invited to start working at the University of São Paulo about a little over 10 years ago, where I had the opportunity to work with John Nash, who was one of my PhD advisors, and game theory was the realm of the work that we used to do. After those few decades of experience in the area of peace building and dispute resolution, conflict resolution, had the opportunity to start the Global Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution at the University of São Paulo. And it's been a very challenging, but also very rewarding experience. We come from the perspective of peace engineering. We are actually located at my background is international law, but we are located at the School of Engineering at the University of São Paulo, where we help build a future of peace, also thinking about materials, about sustainability, and wide-ranging inclusion. We think about gender equilibrium, sustainability, the environment, and innovation and technology used for peace. From a more theoretical perspective, we apply methodologies including centrifugal and centripetal forces when you realize that that a conflict is increasing. It's not enough to apply an equal force in the other direction. The centripetal force that gets you out of that conflict has to be stronger. And many of you can imagine what that entails in the different areas of peace and conflict that you are handling. But today I would like to talk more specifically about an empirical experience that I have been able and fortunate to develop with CSUDH over the last few years, and also with Paulo from the University of Alaska. And prior to going there, I will just say that this center, the Global Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, GLIP, at the University of São Paulo, has also created a center, a conflict resolution center, where we address through alternative resolution, ADR methods, the most known, arbitration and mediation, but nowadays we also apply a lot of tools related to dispute boards. And this is more geared towards conflict prevention, which I believe someone talked about this before, because I mean, if you follow up from the beginning of an initiative, many people can already identify where conflict may arise, and conflict prevention is a tool that is at our availability, and it should be used as often as we can. Now, if we go over to the empirical experience we have had with Paulo from University of Alaska and Brian Jarrett, at the University of São Paulo through the U.S. Consulate in São Paulo, we were awarded by the United States Department of State a grant starting in 2021 through 2022 and then concluded in 2023. In amidst the high point of the COVID-19 pandemic, I mean, that had deeply impacted indigenous populations in the surroundings of São Paulo. Most people, when they think about São Paulo, they think about this mega city, this large city, but it's surrounded by untouched nature and jungles. And there you have indigenous populations that live quite secludedly, but you also have people who live in a more urban setting. So these populations were not being able to fulfill their ability to, they didn't have the ability to fulfill their basic needs for survival during COVID. And they were experiencing lack of food, and the reduction of income was very, very drastic. Their income originally obtained from the sale of handicraft and artwork. So it was, all of this was aggravated by the lack of access to information on how to solve their shortcomings in such a short period of time. So in the first phase, this program, which was called Indigenous Women Empowerment, we concentrated on women and children, indigenous women and children mostly, and addressed their ongoing difficulties in São Paulo state. So upon definition of the objectives, our team tackled the two most important areas in need of support. So it was sustainable income and access to nutritious food. So our partners in the United States, namely California State University, Dominguez Hills, and University of Alaska, greatly contributed through methodology and know-how transfer. I remember talking to Paulo during that time. We had several workshops on how to approach indigenous populations, and it was very, very helpful. And during the time, we were able to achieve a considerable degree of success. So we divided the project into three different groups of indigenous women and children. One that was lived in a reservation in the southern area of São Paulo city, but let's say suburban. One that lives in the neighborhood of São Paulo, in a very urban setting. And the third one was a secluded indigenous reservation located near the northern shore of São Paulo state. So just to give you some the expected outcome and the actual outcome of this project over a period of a little over 2 years, we had expected to impact 50 women and about 200 children from the three indigenous groups. And we ended up impacting over 100 women and more than 300 children by the initiative to date. And one other outcome that we had expected was to increase the knowledge of educational programs for indigenous peoples in the United States and create a track record to feed back to the partnering US universities. So the collaboration helped us enhance and develop through 3 collaborative workshops among the involved institutions, where we had more than 1,000 subscriptions and subsequent thousands and thousands of views. So this collaboration, we could realize, we could notice how the interest was there and how this methodology could be replicated. And then in the second semester of 2022, we also invited some of these populations to come to the University of São Paulo, and there we again had thousands of people registered, and we were invited to celebrate the 200 years of Brazil-US cooperation, foreign cooperation, with the participation of the involved partners. And one of the museums at the University of São Paulo organized this event, and we counted on more than 100 museums and thousands of people from all over the world. I think that the 3 workshops that we did over this period of time allowed us to identify the problems, the most crucial problems that needed to be addressed. And then we performed some of these workshops, the know-how transfer, the technology transfer to those involved. And then we're able to use metrics. I think metrics is something that's really important when you're doing a work like this, because then you can realize where there's still room for improvement and what were some of the real success experiences, so that we can replicate that in different areas of Brazil. And just to conclude, I know you're rushing for time, Brian. Stemming from this initiative, we started new projects. We're also working with Mexico on this to increase the opportunities for Indigenous women in STEM careers where they're underrepresented. So this is now one of the projects, this initiative that started now in 2024, also with the support of the Siemens Foundation, that works very strongly in the issue, in the topic of STEM education. So approaching, giving the opportunity to Indigenous women to enter in the careers of science, technology, and also health and healthcare, which is very important because these populations are strongly affected by some of these hindrances. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. That's your center does really great work, and people just, and you always open the invitation to people to come down to connect. And I think you're just, the whole way you operate down there is just fantastic. And we, so that's an invitation, open invitation to people to connect with you, and all of the folks down there doing just terrific work.
Thank you, Brian.
Let's hold questions, and we'll go over now to what we decided. We're chatting among ourselves about our last topic area, and that is simply to report on a summary of the work we've been doing with the University of Guadalajara. And that is, Jorge, if you could step up, and we'll let you summarize for us some of the work we've been recently doing in this part of the panel, and say a few words. And then we'll go to open questions to everybody. Give us a bit of time at the end. Jorge, go ahead. And by the way, Jorge's from the University of Guadalajara. Sorry, man. Jorge's from the University of Guadalajara. He's running the program at the University of Guadalajara. We were down there, some folks from NCRP, and just, you're doing a great job down there, Jorge. And just, when you received us too to work with you down there, it was just really very special. And we felt really honored to be there. Renee Castro, myself, John Swarbrick, and I should mention also Ana, who really brought us together, Ana Rodriguez, here on this, in our conference today as well. But go ahead, Jorge. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Brian. That's right. We have a great experience the past year with your visit in the University of Guadalajara. We have now about 2 years now working together with Brian in some projects of we're planning to work together. We're working with some with the technology to make more easy the communication between our institutions. We have also like in the case in the Sao Paulo's University, we have a mediation center in the university, and we have a conflict resolution program. In the last year, we have been working in the approach to the online dispute resolution, the ODR, but using the technology that is the metaverse. We are working with the metaverse. We are using it like a tool for conflict resolution. In that, we are looking for a new approaching to this to the technology, but searching for new avenues that help us to understand the communication in the distance, and is still working in building peace. We have affront many challenges in the access to the use of this technology. We have identified some problems like the problem with the with the internet connection, the problems with the access to technology. So we and also the use of technology. Some of the users not also familiar with the use of technology. So that's some of the problems we have been identified with with our practice, but also that has convinced us that these tools are really helpful, but not the only answer to to make the communication more easy. It's just a tool, but it's a great tool. We have now experience with our group in the university, with our students, with some simulations in the metaverse of process of mediation. We have often some interesting results because many of our students was in denial of the use of this kind of technology. They thought that it's impersonal and it's no so practical. But after the first try, we found that their opinion has changed a lot, saying that it was something that made more comfortable the use of the communication, and we also identified that maybe for some people that was because of it's a communication different like the we have right now, where we have a camera and we are seeing each other, yes, in the distance, but this is some kind of communication where we are looking at us. But in the use of the metaverse, they are using avatars, and that make in some cases to the participants feel more free, because they don't have their face in the camera, is their avatar, and so it made more easy the communication. It's important to say that the most of this positive experience are concentrated in people that are digital users because of their age principle. It's not exclusive, but it's in some range of age where they are more comfortable with the use of these tools. Nevertheless, we think that the use of digital tools in the conflict resolution represents a great opportunity to expand the reach of the effectiveness of our efforts to still promoting and building peace. And this is the way that we are working right now, because it has also another benefits, like that it's cheap in comparison with make a travel and go to another country, and that it also gives us the opportunity to work in big groups and make the coincidence in a virtual space, but finally staying in the same place. No? Virtual space, but this is the same place for all stay all together. Here is connected also Ceci, who is from the internationalization area from the university. I just would like that she at least say hi to everybody.
Yes. Thanks, Jorge. Appreciate that. Ana, Cecilia Rodriguez, I also agree. She's doing great work and connected everybody and really showing what a good mediator does, because she was connecting everybody from our different universities. In fact, at one point we had 4 universities connected in there. Ana, just want to say hello and to people and let them know who you are.
All right. Well, my name is Ana Cecilia Herrera, and I'm head of the Cooperation and Internationalization Unit at one of the campuses of University of Guadalajara. We are 18 campuses across the state of Jalisco. So I work with economic and business administration programs. And there is the conflict resolution program where Jorge Leos is the coordinator. So when they told me they were interested in collaborating, I reached out to Dr. Brian Jarrett, and I'm very proud to see that they keep in touch. They've been to our campus, which was a great pleasure to have them there. And also they started this semester with a session with virtual mobility and the metaverse and mediation. So I'm here to help. If anyone's interested in creating more links, just contact me. I'll write my email on the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Ana. So let's go put it the floor now to, actually, before we do that, Harold from Yukon, just going to give you a moment, because I know you always like to step in and say a few words, and we're just going to let you say a few words, Harold. Are you there to just to say hello? You do such good work and should be recognized too. So.
Thank you, Brian. Am I unmuted? Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm grateful today to sit in on this this gathering, and you know, the world's turned upside down right now, and if somebody's got a solution towards peace, please share it with me. But at the same time I say that, I enjoyed listening to some of the conversation. We're originally our ancestors on Tlingit, Daka Tlingit, our ancestors were governed by matriarchs. And the matriarchs were responsible for keeping peace in the community. What I realize now when I look back, I got just the tail end of that, is that the oldest women in the community knew when trouble was coming, and they got in front of it. They stopped it before it escalated into conflict. But I think just today, to listen to the world, this Indigenous comes from a different world. You see these northern lights behind me, just to give you an example. We're told by our elders and ancestors, don't go out at night and whistle when those northern lights are out, because those are the spirits of people that have left this earth and they're having a bit of a struggle getting back home again. What a different world that is. What a different concept, you know. But peace also, I think we got to look at a more broader spectrum. How did Indigenous people, we had a justice. Our justice comes from spirit world. Our ancestors, their law came from the spirit world, not man-made, spirit-made. And I think now when I look at what's going on in the world, the turmoil, conflict, war, get more, want more, need more everything, as we kill the earth. That I think the ancestors and the people that were here before us that lived by that universal law, we now need to be reminded of it. And I've contributed, I've helped out, I've tried to share, I've been all over the place, but I've also realized this, that's important to me. Peace comes from inside me. Inside me. I've looked every place else for it, but I'm now finding it inside me. And when I find peace inside me, I'm going to share it with other people. I'm going to share that path to peace. I'm grateful, and I think now in this world that we're living in for the future generations, it's time to put our hearts together. pray together, celebrate ceremony together, and to support each other for the future generation of this earth. I'm concerned. But at the same time, I'm also grateful that I have opportunity to look for peace through my ancestors' way of seeing the world. And I'm ever so grateful for that. So for those people that are striving for peace, thank you so much. I have grandchildren. I have many grandchildren. And I want them to inherit a peaceful world. So keep it up, please. Whatever it is, please keep it up. And thank you so much for your efforts. And I'll continue to do what I do from here. Thank you, Brian, for this opportunity once again, brother.
Thank you, Errol. Thank you, brother. You're a very good man, Howard. You do so much work. You've actually done a lot of work in Europe, in Eastern Europe. You've been all over the planet. And the Queen of England gave you a medal for the work you've done. And quite amazing, actually. And so really good to have you here. So let's go to open questions to any question of any speaker. And we got this opportunity to end here. So let's open the floor then.
Brian, Tina Jones has been waiting pretty patiently.
Tina, okay, from Maryland. Yeah. Tina, good to see you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to share the space. Thank you so much. I posted in chats, but I wanted to know what this was directed at Ukraine panelists. What don't we know about in terms of the impact on this war on children and youth? I posted a positive message about the game that was designed with a project with the Ukrainian Academy of Mediation. I just wanted to see if I could get an understanding or perspective of this war and its impact and consequence on children.
So
Thank you.
Go ahead. Yeah, anyone would like to answer that?
Unmute. That should be better. As somebody involved, I don't have the special understanding to know what that is. I think it's universal to all conflict zones. You're living in fear, genuine fear, seeing death all around you, genuinely not knowing, believing that you will die. These children believe that they will die. So the truth of the matter is that it is traumatic on a level that I can't almost conceive of. And it needs genuine generational impact and intervention on a societal level. My fear is that will not happen because I see it not happening in other places. The only thing I can say, and I'm not even sure, and I'm conflicted about saying it, but a generation later, once they've been through the pain and the suffering, there is a resilience, there is a societal resilience that allows recovery. But that doesn't deny the reality of the suffering that is happening in the moment. But the truth of the matter is I do not have the capability to describe what needs to be done in Ukraine in that instance.
Can I add David said? So we just did a brief for the Department of State's Foreign Service Institute over at the George Mitchell campus. And it was precisely on looking at the impact of PTSD and anxiety, not much in terms of depression on, it's happening now. Why wait to the end of the war? They're looking at these three baskets: the international diplomacy, munitions, demining, and dealing with the walking wounded, the hidden wounds and kinds of things like that. And we looked at Colombia, Bosnia, and several other places and said, what was the international response when it came to basically human mental health? And David touched on something there. That's why I wanted to say something. you see a generational kind of thing. They mature into this, but there's maladaptive responses, and then sometimes later on, there's like when they each reach the young adulthood, some of the crimes and some of the antisocial behaviors that may have come in a prior era kind of crop back up. So when the war's over in Ukraine, one of the things that the international mental health community is going to have to be working with the Ukrainian mental health community is like this wave kind of aspect. And some of the things we're using in terms of technology to deal with it now is like, I'll say this, when you go to Ukrainian school, there's Ukrainians and there's Ukrainian Russians, and the kids know not to talk politics because they know at home some of the parents are Russian sympathizers and they have a Russian connection. And before the war, that wasn't such a big deal, but now they know it's off limits. And so what we might see as a typical kind of cognitive turf war is actually really damaging and dangerous for kids in schools. So on top of everything, having to run to bomb shelters, like if you're in the Kyiv region, or if you live in a 20-story high rise, you can maybe make it to the hallway by the time, the alarms are there and the drones fly by and whatnot. All that stuff that's piling on is what you're looking at, massive amounts of army of people, young people who have deep anxiety. And on top of that, their older brothers and their dads and uncles come back, PTSD, like all out. And there's hundreds of thousands of automatic weapons floating around the country, and there's plenty of alcohol, and domestic violence is shot through the roof. And kids are caught in this stuff. So it's the perfect storm. And so there are some ways that the State Department is trying to say, well, what's worked in the past? And this war is totally new. It's totally different in the fact that a lot of it's online, and kids are, and you should look at this, folks, the psychiatric literature on children online, and not just normally online, but during the war. And there is actually a new case of casualty specific to Ukraine, people watching it getting so stressed out. Well, look at the kids who have to watch this stuff too. When I say people watching it, I'm talking about adults in other countries that get into deep fits of depression or have their own anxiety or their own flashbacks and whatnot. I can't imagine what it's like to be there all the time and be a 15-year-old wondering, in 3 years, am I going to get called up and am I going to wind up dead somewhere? So there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. At least the international community is trying to forecast these things and do some scenario building, maybe backcast too, because look at what goes on. What happened in Bosnia has been something of a failure and something of a success, and learn from those failures so don't repeat it in Ukraine. It's complex, but the panelists would know that.
If maybe I can also just
Joanna?
add one
Yeah.
thing. Hi. Yes, I think on the impact of the kids, I think there are different kind of types of impacts because, of course, the war hits kids in a different ways. You have a huge number of displaced, internally displaced, and in general displaced families and kids in Ukraine. There's a lot of them living outside of the country, and many of them with the guilt that they should be in the country. So I think that's also a very traumatic experience if they feel that they should be there, especially teenage boys or teenage girls that they think bad, that, of themselves bad, that they should be there, and then they feel that maybe they will be treated negatively after the war is over, that they have not been at the place of war to help the friends, families, and so on. Second is those that internally were displaced and moved from the areas that are really a proper war zone. And I would say that kids in those proper war zones in the east of the country and in the south of the country are hit the most. And this is where the war is the most violent. So apart from the fact that many of them lose members of the family, they had experience violence themselves very often, and also sexual abuse. I mean, there's a lot of really horrible things ongoing, and the traumas in this region are really, really gigantic, and there is not enough experts, I think, in the area to actually currently deal with all these traumas. So those are heavy traumas, but the kind of a trauma of the constant air raid and the fact that they are kind of now used to it and it became just normal. A lot of kids are not even actually going to the shelter. A lot of parents are not even making an effort to put kids to the shelter, because if you have it every couple of hours and then next day kids need to go to the school, they just put them in the worst case. If they know from the app that this is not a drone attack but a proper missile attack, they just put them into the bathtub, you know, which is not really a proper shelter. So I think those traumas are huge, and of course the impact is going to be incredible, and for many, many years and maybe the generations to come. But how do we deal with it? I'm not sure if we have learned the lessons from other wars. Have we really learned the lessons of, you know, war in the Yugoslavia or conflicts anywhere else? I'm not sure. I think people are still dealing with these traumas, the psychological and emotional impact of trauma, and how to heal it. I would say it's still not where it should be, and the wars are continuing. So I think this is the biggest tragedy of the conflict that I see currently.
Can I jump back in real quick? I want to make this disclosure and disclaimer. Joanna was one of the people we interviewed for our briefing to the State Department, and her fake name was the mediator, but she was the only person that we interviewed that was okay. I could be on the record. But some of the research that we were able to, Joanna, I'm just kind of closing the loop with you and telling everyone while we're here, but we looked at a lot of the medical science research from these war zones. It's very interesting. You mentioned internally displaced people and refugees, and what's kind of interesting, the pattern that's sort of kind of goes in so many different conflict zones is the internally displaced people show much higher levels of trauma and anxiety than refugees, and in particular, women with children. The women show the greatest number, even after it's over, they go back home, the most sort of like disruptive cognitive behavior, and it takes a long time, if at all, for them to recover. And that's sort of like, at least we know one thing from the medical science research, we can sort of target specific communities if we know, for instance, that the internally displaced people are going to have more need than the returning refugees, you know, and there's going to be guilt. I have several students. I just raised $40,000 for tuition for them. They're here, they're safe with their grandparents and their aunts and uncles and whatnot. And when war's over, they get to get on a plane and go home, whereas their neighbors didn't. And that's two different people, two different sets of kids from the same neighborhood that are going to have this. There's going to be like a survival guilt, and then there's a trauma. And so what the State Department is trying to do is, and this is where I think it gets thrown back over the fence to you, John, when it comes to negotiating, facilitating parliament to parliament, is like, how do we distribute the resources and the funding and the mental health professionals to assist the Ukrainians to go after each and every one of these groups? And there's estimates like 60% of the adult population that's in Ukraine, mostly to the east and the south, are PTSD symptomatic. That's crazy. That's a crazy amount of number. But hey, I'm going too much.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah. Other comments and questions on that particular point?
I do have a question, if I may ask.
Go ahead. Yep.
My question is about to Brian. Why don't we have trauma-informed public policy, like we have a fiscal note on every single bill that comes through Congress? There's a fiscal note on there to give us the cost of the bill. Why don't we have a trauma-informed public policy note on each bill to see what the trauma effects are? Because whether you're a conservative Republican or a Democrat, it seems everybody wants to save money. And an ounce, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It seems like we are trying to go back later on and clean up and heal, when we could be making policy that could save a lot of energy, a lot of money, if it was trauma informed. If we were going to use the word trauma informed. I'm a public policy expert. I went to the LBJ School of Public Policy, but I've never heard anybody talk about trauma informed public policy. And the thing about our president, I really had a lot of confidence that he would do something like that, but it never happened. He came from a place of trauma. He has come from a place of trauma. So I thought he would actually have some sensitivity towards trauma-informed public policy. Some things are trumping other things, and that's obvious as we look over the horizon. But I would like to know, why have we not even pursued any kind of trauma-informed
Yeah,
public
that's a
policy?
good question, Roger. Let's put that to Brian Polkinghorn, to anybody else who wants to talk about that.
Well, I would say this, I'm not an expert on it, and you'd have to have a champion or some sort of major event, 9/11, for that to get back into the political dialogue. The problem with politics is we have politicians, and unless they see some sort of, I know I'm being nasty by saying this, but unless they see something beneficial coming from it, not just altruism and empathy, it's hard to get them to sell. And I'm up on the Hill all the time. I literally walk into members of Congress and members, the Senate, and I think they're always angling, like, what's the angle? What's in it for me? And unfortunately, it takes something terrible to unite partisan people. 9/11 did, right after 9/11, we had that, and that's when we could have these conversations. And right now we're so divided that it would be an attribution error to even bring something like that, because people are going to tend to want to say, well, whose idea is it? And then discount it or accept it as it is. I think it's a great idea, but, and then, by the way, here's another thing. The good news is the diamond in the rough is the National Institutes of Mental Health and at National Institutes of Health and all those big agencies. There's 29 centers and institutes, even at NIH. They have a pretty big pull on Capitol Hill, and it's in there, but it's kind of deeply embedded. But it's not used as a filter for the making the justification, rationale, or analysis of public policy. And I just missed. Oh, where'd he go?
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, sorry.
It's a great topic. Anybody else want to chime in on that? Here's your chance to chime in, because we're coming to time here, so on the conference. So if you haven't said anything, you want to just say a quick word, here's your opportunity.
Can I have one last thing for?
Yeah, go ahead, Brian. Yeah.
On Tushar's behalf.
On Tushar, sure.
On Tushar's behalf, yeah. He was very close to his father, and we went on this tour a lot, took a lot of people. I wrote in the chat that you go on this and, people have bucket lists and whatnot, but if you've been in a situation where it's changed your life, I see a couple of people here on my screen that have gone on the tour before. It really does, it resets and reboots and recasts and redials everything in. You come back with a great appreciation for so many things. And if you want to look at that, it's Gandhi Legacy Tours with an S, and you get an idea of what they're up to. And this is the memorial tour on for his dad, Arun. And I say this, when we show up to all these places around India, the media rolls out, the politicians roll out, so we try and hide a little bit from him because he wants to have just something with us. But it's take a look if you're interested, or at least pass the word along if you think there's somebody who may be wanting to have that experience.
Okay, folks. Well, listen, if you want to connect to anybody on the team that spoke today, or somebody else in the room, we'll just email our team, the NCRP team. We'll connect you up. It's been a great conference. I really enjoy working with everybody here, and we've learned a lot today from the speakers. It really is a good opportunity to listen to the experiences people have in their work and the practices they're using. Remember this, that though we strive mightily, let us always eat and drink as friends, and remember our common humanity. And so with that, I will say I'll bid you adieu. All right, until next conference next year. Keep doing the great work, everybody. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for coming.